This is a group that's been devoted to trying to help transition a kind of, let's say a traditional is not the right word, a kind of a model of synagogue life that's been now in operation in America for, I don't know, close to 100 years. So I know that you work with congregations that are trying to transition from an older model, let's call it, to a newer model.
Yes.
And what do you find are the obstacles for the leaders particularly in making the transition happen?
First place, if you draw like a Johari window, you got 4 quadrants in your congregation. There are people in the congregation who came before you as in your leadership, and there are people who came after you came there as leader. Okay. There are people in your congregation who are younger than you, and there are people who are older. Okay. Now, in these 4 quadrants, the most difficult to lead, obviously, are those who came before and are older, right? Because they got their own view of what the synagogue ought to be. Okay. The easiest ones to lead are those who came after you and are younger. Okay. Now, and the other 2 groups, by the way, are always looking to these others to decide who we're going to follow. Okay. And so what you need is an Aaron in all 4 quadrants. You need a spokesman. Okay? So that you're not the spokesman. You need an Aaron who says, you know what? She's right. Unless, you know, and like that, okay? And so one of the things you do, one of the first things you do in leadership is when you get into a congregation, you discover who the legitimizers are. Do you remember the old E.F. Hutton? When E.F. Hutton speaks, everybody listens? Okay. You need to know who are the E.F. Huttons in your congregation. Okay. You got to know who they are, because you can't work with them until you first know who they are. Now, typically, I don't know how you make decisions in a synagogue. I know, you know, in Christianity, there. I don't want to know. Well, you know, in Christianity, there are 3 forms of church government. One is called the congregational form of government, which everybody votes on everything. Then there is the Presbyterian form of government, which is you have a board of elders and they decide. And then there's the Episcopal form of government, where basically a bishop decides. The problem is, all 3 of those are not really biblical formats. They came out of, they're versions of an American democracy. And what we've done in America is we've taken an American form of government and imposed them on our congregations, and then the congregations are about as effective as the government is, which isn't very long, and it takes forever to make a decision, okay, because it takes forever to get through. You know, as I read Scripture, it seems to me that the wise, we are to pay attention to the wise. We are to pay attention to those who are mature. But I would find out who are the E.F. Huttons in your church, and then I would individually begin to share the ideas with them over breakfast and lunch, not in a congregational meeting. Okay? I don't know why it is. You can take 8 really good people and put them on a committee and they turn into monsters. Why does that happen? I mean, individually they're okay, but you get them in a room together and they just, this rooster kind of thing of, you know, a pecking order starts, well, you said that, so I got to say this. And, you know, and that's why you try to have as few of those meetings as possible. And what I would do is when I first started the church and we had no government, I'd take all of the influencers, the legitimizers, out individually, one-on-one, and I'd say, now, Ron, I want you to know you got my ear. Okay, so anytime you want to say something, just come to me and talk to me. I'm listening, I'm open. And I found that people didn't feel like they had to challenge me publicly if they felt like they could at any moment pick up the phone and say, Rick, I think you're heading down the wrong path on this. And so I diffused a lot of the conflict by keeping it out of the public realm, by simply keeping it relational. Does that make sense? Okay, so I do that. Here's another tip. Be a proponent of the new, not an opponent of the old. This is very important. Don't be a reactionary. It's not but or, it's and. Yes, and this. Yes, and this. Now, one of the things you learn over the years is that you will succeed in what you emphasize. Let me give you an example. This is so funny. At Saddleback Church, when we started the church, we actually had a Sunday morning service and we had a Sunday night service. Okay, it was so I had to preach 2 different times, 2 different messages. When the church was about a year old, the Sunday morning kept growing, and Sunday morning people were voting with their feet, and nobody was showing up. Okay, and so one day on a church retreat, I said, "Hey, why don't we just cancel the Sunday night service?" "Oh no, we can't do that." The church wasn't even a year old, and it was already a tradition.
Right.
Okay, it is amazingly how fast a tradition can become a tradition. And you will find that the biggest wars in your congregation are not over theology, they are over traditions. Okay, they are not, most people don't even know the theology. Okay, so what I did is I said, okay, what we'll do is we'll keep the service going. I'm just not going to lead it anymore. 6 months later, we closed it for lack of interest. Never had to vote to kill it, simply because I didn't show. Does that make sense? Let me give you one other illustration. If you go down to the New Orleans, they build these houses up on stilts so that when the Mississippi River comes and it floods, it doesn't flood the homes. Okay, so they're built on stilts. About every 6 or 7 years, those stilts go bad from the floods coming down. Okay, well, they don't just come in and knock out all the stilts. What they do is they come in and they just build up new ones underneath and leave the others. And they eventually just crumble. Okay? And that's what I teach pastors to do. I say, don't go in and say, well, we shouldn't do this anymore. That's out of date. Or that's not reaching young couples. We just go in and build the new thing and let the other stuff kind of crumble away. It saves you a lot of war.